Tom Nguyen, the Director of Test Automation and Tools at Arlo Technologies. And I have worked a lot in engineering development teams. I've worked on development teams, program management, and now I'm in test automation. Okay, and Dean can introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Dean, DevOps manager. My primary area of focus in DevOps has been CICD. And very happy to be here to share our experience and share lessons with you guys.
All right, so we started, I think. Now, one of the things that I guess everyone here, I don't need to explain to you what CICD is. This is the group here. But if you did the Google search, and I did that on CICD, there's like 753 million results on what is CICD. And you can search on that, and you get some of that. And you see that a lot of it focus on technology, right? And in fact, we were going to talk about what technologies we'll be using and all that stuff, and we mentioned that briefly. But the one thing that you don't see much about is sort of the people, the people behind the process and the tools. And this is actually really critical and important in our experience, because the challenges we have a lot more to do with people than technologies, although technologies do present challenges. And so that's our talk, is focused on people. Okay, now before we go into the people side of things, I kind of want to introduce you a little bit to Arlo, so you can understand what kind of products and teams and tools we have to deal with. First is, in case you're not, I wonder how many of you here know Arlo? Raise your hand. How many of you have an Arlo? Okay, all right. Well, we actually wanted to, everyone heard Ring, right? And we are sort of the #1 wire-free cameras on the market. And we have those little things here. There's the Arlo Baby, the thing with the rabbit, and all those wire-frees. And we also have apps security cameras, so you want to see who came to the door. And those are Android, web, and iOS. The focus that we want to talk about here is that there's a lot of different teams involved in working on this. So we have teams we have 3 different client app teams, one for web, one for Android, one for iOS, as you might expect. We have firmware teams, because there is firmware in every one of those guys there. And there's also something called base station that you don't see in here. And also, of course, your usual corporate teams that you have: program management, product management, executive management, and we also have security, which is a pretty big part for us, where we have both in terms of company security, but also product security. That's a very big thing. Okay, now, got to have some technical things, so just to put you in context, trying to understand what we use a lot of the tools that off-the-shelf tools. Some are free, like Jenkins, open source. We use the open source version of that. But some are paid, like the GitHub Enterprise and Harness. And we use the Splunk. So you can see over here, let's see. This is sort of the basic build. We have build servers, we have artifacts. The thing is not to understand all these pictures here, but just look at these keywords and identify all these different components we have to deal with. That's the whole main point about this slide, not to go through the technical underpinnings of all of that. But, and also, of course, we have to test clients, which are, this is the iOS, Android, and different web. And we also have the Arlo's devices, so we have to simulate them or run them for real. And the clients, we also run simulators. We run UI. This is for functional tests, right? Of course, we also have unit tests and all that. But we would run either native tests and also Appium and Selenium and Catalan Studio. How many of you here are familiar with Catalan Studio? No one is? Okay, all right. Well, you can maybe look that up later if you have a chance. All right, let me pass it over to Dean. Yeah.
Okay, and I joined Arlo back in May 2018. So that was the state of CICD when I joined Arlo. Builds are done manually. You manually trigger each build. And for some teams, you enter the commit hash in Git. And we have 3 physically separate file/deploying servers. So at any given point in time, we may have the same binary sitting in 3 different places. okay? And there's not a whole lot of test automation at the time. So each time we do a deployment, we have to wait for the QA team members to go in and verify the deployment actually works. And even back in the development side, we had both Git and SVN at the time, and branching strategy wasn't consistent. And you can just imagine all the nightmares that we have, right? So let's go through some of those that we have to deal with. Number one, probably seen some of these before, right? Do not deploy on the weekend, right? By the laughter in the room, I know you identify with this. How about the next one? QA team members in the room, right? We do all testing, production. Okay, and number three, my personal favorite. Right? Only if that happens in real world. We'll love that. Okay, and since then, what we did was we pulled in the key stakeholders from engineering team, QA team, IT team, everybody who should be involved, and we defined what the CICD minimum viable product should be. That took months. And after that, my role was to go ahead and execute both the CI MVP milestones and CD MVP milestones. And right now, sitting in October, November timeframe, we did a good review of where CI/CD is, and we decided, hey, now is the time that we should take a few components end to end, all the way from source code into production. So that's where we are right now. And throughout the past many months, we learned so much about process and technology. But more importantly, you want to focus on people. Why people? Who are your customers? Are they machines or are they people? Who are your coworkers? Are they humans or are they Linux boxes? We work for people, we work with people, and that's why sometimes in the Valley, we forget that just look at in this room, it's full of people, right? So the human side of people, process, technology framework is something that we want to focus on today. So without further ado, here are the lessons that we learned.
Okay, and these are some of the lessons I'm sure you can, as you think of this, either they can identify with it or think of your own on this, right? And the first first lesson is communicate early and often. You know, it's like Chicagoans, right? They tell you to vote early and vote often. That's illegal, by the way. But it is not illegal to communicate early and often, right? And you know, it's easier said, but it's actually really hard to do. And one of the lessons I keep on learning again and again is how I think that I have communicated, but I haven't done it good enough, and there are things that could be done better. And so what are, you know, some of the key points that that I kind of try to keep in mind, right? First is you got to understand who are the key stakeholders. And every one of those, whether the executives, engineering team, QA, IT ops, they have different perspective, they have different goals, and the challenge is a lot of times these things are conflicting, right? Some people may say, oh, I just want something done real quick so that I can claim credit for that, right? And then some of the other guys say, in engineering side, who says, oh, yeah, you can't, MVP, you have to have all these features in there. You can't do it. You know, I would not accept, I will not sign off until you've done every single thing that you automated, test every single one of my features, things of that sort. And these are conflicting. And one of the ways that you address that is to go and sometimes, you know, you gotta get them together in a room. First, you have to isolate them so you can understand their viewpoints. And then once, at some point, you understand them and you bring them together and say, hey, you know, you guys, you gotta come to an agreement. I can't do anything and everything of that, right? And of course, the other thing is the level of details that I mentioned, is whether you go to high-level value proposition, and it depends on who you talk to, which is why you can't always bring everyone into the room and give them a detailed presentation or give them a sales pitch. You know, no matter what you do, there's always be some group of people who will be disappointed because they're looking for different things and expect different things. So you gotta understand your target audience at different times, right? And the last but not least is repetition. Is that remember that the message sent is not message received. A lot of times I remember even my colleagues or teammate, I was saying, okay, did you did you tell so-and-so? And they say, yeah, I told them, right? But just because you tell them something doesn't mean that did you check that they really understood what you say, and did they agree with what you say? Are they going to take action on what you say? All of those things really add up, and so you need to verify those, right? Okay, and second one is WUFFM. How many of you have heard the word WUFFM? Not too many people? Oh my goodness. Okay, then you really got to learn this lesson. WUFFM stands for what's in it for me. And I'm so surprised that this is really, really important, because whenever people listen to you saying something, just kind of like, they got to think, okay, all right, it's great you tell me all of that, select this technology, do this, do that, but how is this going to help me? I look at it from my own perspective, right? As in, how is this affecting me individually, me, my team, my colleagues, whatever it is. This is from my perspective. And when you present things and when you're trying to make choices, you have to try and understand a little bit. And a lot of times you don't understand that, and you understand it by talking to individually, as I mentioned, right? And so people come with different skills and experience. So like, let's say, suppose you propose, say, oh, I want to use Ansible. And someone says, I want to use, Chef. Something for management, right? Either because they have some experience in that, or maybe one of them just, hate Ruby or love Ruby, whatever. If you understand sort of some of their background and experience up there, then you can hopefully understand what they say. Because a lot of times when they say something, there's a lot of assumptions and knowledge and experience with that, and if you can't put that in context, it's hard. Of course, the other thing is personal interest. Like, for example, when I was trying to choose a platform, for test development, and like a language, we try and choose whether we're doing, native tests or Appium, and of course Selenium, you got to do Selenium. But for mobile, you can choose either you do native or you do Appium, which lay on top, and you can do for both. And then even after you choose that, then you choose what language, right? Some people like Python, some people like Java, some people, in fact, we kind of decided to go with Kotlin. And one of the reasons we did that is because of the interest, because of Java, that the people know and like Java, but they want to kind of learn a little bit something else and deal with that. And because they're so interested, they spend a lot more time and effort in learning and going up that effort. And the language itself is actually not the problem. For the more senior developers, a lot of people say, oh, it can be anything as long as it's Python, right? If you're a good developer and you've done a lot of different, you realize that language, unless you do really complex, object-oriented or functional programming, if you do basic procedural programming like you do for test automation, it doesn't really matter. And of course, they always think of, how is this affecting me in terms of my career growth? And if I learn that, right, like right now, trying to convince someone to learn Perl, I don't know, how many of you here program in Perl? Okay. Have you been able to convince anyone else new to learn Perl? Okay. All right. Another. Yeah, that's right. Yes. I mean, it's just like COBOL, right? There's still systems in COBOL, and you probably get to pay a bundle, but there's not too many job opportunities there. But when you do get them, they're good. Okay, and another lesson, and this is one where I kind of have to keep on remind people, because a lot of time in the meeting is when you evaluate, when you have to compare choosing A or B, how do you prioritize these things? What do I do first? I have all these things I got to do, and I have all these conflicting things. At the end of the day, you have limited resource, you have limited money, you got to choose something to do and prioritize. And so you got to do it based on both cost and value. A lot of times I see that people forget one or the other. And so what are the costs? You have to buy the software, hardware purchases. And the people got to the learning curve, right? That's not free. And this is a problem every time you change something or do something, even the simplest things, it takes time to learn, and it takes time to change people over to that. And that you have to allow time for that. In fact, if you see the curve of most things, whenever you make any change, the productivity goes down first before it rises up. Almost always, because that time is the learning curve and where you make mistakes and other kind of things like that, right? And of course, so the other thing is also cost of setting things up, development, configurations, all that, but also the bigger cost, and this is one where you have to, is maintenance, which is why I'm a big fan of low code or no code. Right? But if you got a bunch of developers on your team, they want to code everything, and they say, "Oh yeah, no, I'll write my own framework. I'll write my own web framework. I'll do." And how many times, or like, "Oh, anything. Let's just crank it up. In Django. Django is pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good, but you got to go up the Django learning curve before you do things. Whereas some of these no code, you just point and click, and it'll take me, half an hour to teach, or so let's say even a day to teach someone that, versus how long would it take you to get up to speed in Django? Once you get up to it, you can do it in a day, but it's going to take you a few weeks beforehand to get to that point. And the value, of course, and this one is executive. My executive said, I got to do so-and-so. Or that customer call up the executive and say, you got to fix that, although that bug only happens for him and no one else. And then everyone spends all the resource without realizing the cost of that. And and whether, and also sort of like, if you do this, I would get to market faster. So time to market, whatever the value proposition is, you got to try and understand and either quantify or qualify it as much as possible. Whether it's improved quality and things. And I think the way that sometimes it's really hard, when you have, I don't know if you ever come this, where the executive comes down and say, oh, drop everything, do this. And then tomorrow, drop everything else, do this, right? And the way that you can help with that is you always got to have your list, your prioritized list, and say, here's my list. If I drop this, this is, if I do this, this is getting dropped. And hopefully that if you show that and show that how you really spend your time and manage that well, then you will get some agreement. Because even, when people come to me and ask, should I do this or should I do this? I said, I really can't answer it until you show me if you do this, what are you not doing, right? And okay.
All right, thanks, Tom. Okay, my slides don't have as many bullet points, so bear with me. When my wife gave birth, we stayed in the hospital for a couple of days, and I noticed something. The doctors will come and make rounds once in the morning and once in the afternoon, right, just to check on you, see how things are. So I took a page out of what the doctors did. When I first joined Arlo, I didn't know anybody, right? So I start walking around the office, engineering team, facilities, sales, supply chain, shipping, and everybody just to say, hi, hey, my name is Dean, and I'm new. We're starting out a CICD team here at Arlo. And when you go, you better smile in the morning, talking to people, introducing yourself, you start learning a lot more. And what I realized is the information that I got out of those conversations sometimes are more useful than having meetings, right? When you go on, people are just working on something, they are deep thinking about what they're working on, and you just show up and you start talking to you about it. Right, I'll give you an example. We were talking with one team about a static analysis tool that they're really interested in. And doing the rounds, I found out that a member from a different team, they haven't talked to each other yet, but a member from a different team has an in-depth knowledge of that tool, right? And just by doing that, we connected them together and we're able to deliver, including that tool in the CI pipeline. And also a side benefit is as you make rounds, you're really raking out a lot of steps on your Fitbit, right? Later on, when I got lazy, sometimes, I just don't feel like walking, then the tip is this. In the morning, find out when people come in, when people get coffee and tea, wait in that break room for half an hour for them to show up and get their the first shot of caffeine, right? And you use the time wisely to talk to people. Lesson 5, like I mentioned earlier, we found out a member from a different team has really good knowledge about the tool. And also we learn from that. We start working with the most motivated teams. One of the earliest slides showed that we have close to 9 different teams that we have to work with. And they are at different places in CICD. Right? Some developers, they haven't been exposed to this culture as much. One of the first questions I got asked when I joined was, wait, what's the difference between CI/CD and DVD? I was speechless. I had no question. But then we also have team who came from companies and they've done this before. They've walked the path before. So if you start working with them, you can get a lot more things done in a shorter amount of time. An example that I have is we work with a team who's really ahead of the curve compared to other teams. And we were able to revamp the CI pipeline a few times. And then we're able to reduce the amount of time to onboard new components to CICD from a few days down to just an hour or two. So start working with the motivated clients. Lesson 6, we've all heard the phrase, we're on the same boat. People don't know you are on the same boat with them until you show them. Last year, before we had CICD, we have to go through a few major deployments, right? As a CICD team member, we were just starting out to build the pipeline. So we weren't able to help our fellow coworkers as much. I remember one night, there was a major release coming out. Remember all those memes earlier, a major release, and it's gonna happen close to a weekend. People are really, and we learned that they haven't ordered dinner yet. So I went to my director and asked, hey, director, of course, that's not his name. Can we get some budget out of our department and provide dinner for the engineers and the ops team because they're doing a major deployment tonight? And some of them don't have dinner. And he said yes. And so we did that, ordered dinner for everybody. Even though we are not able to be there with them technically, we're with them emotionally and psychologically, right? And man, for the next 2 days, I was the most popular person in the office, right? And as you know, everybody, when you walk down the hallway, when people see you, associate you with certain set of values, right? And you have to choose what those values are. Do you want them to associate you with positive values or negative ones? And by doing little things like this, showing them we're on the team together goes a long way. Number 7, be flexible. And of course, I can't do that myself. Just over the last few months, we, quote unquote, redid Jenkins 3 times. We changed our CI pipeline on a weekly basis. We just have to do so many things to accommodate the different requirements, different new products, different personalities sometimes. And it's really important to be flexible. And what I mean by that is do not change your core value, right? Automation is important. Doing things end-to-end is important. Think of it as this, you're being a chameleon, right? On the surface, your color changes, but deep within, you are a CI/CD engineer, right? And by doing this, you'll be able to understand and communicate with different team members a lot more easily. Number 8, this is something, can you, okay, hey, never mind. For the folks who hasn't seen that yet, I got this, I saw this 2 weeks ago from the Inc. magazine, and it instantly clicked. You haven't seen the answer yet, right? You may take the time to guess. But then this one skill for true leadership is, of course, humility. And that's definitely true for everybody, including DevOps and CI/CD engineers. How do you get there? Sometimes people ask me, how do you, I don't think humility is 100% natural. It's also a learned skill. 3 things that help me. I'm not a humble person, I confess. But when I'm in the right mode, I'm doing the right things, sometimes I can get there. The 3 things that I feel are the most helpful is number 1, ask for feedback. When you're asking for feedback, you're asking the other person to open up and share their lessons and their values with you. And second thing is use magic words. Now I feel like an elementary school teacher, right? You'd be surprised how little sometimes people use thank you, sorry, and please. Just by using those magic words, you're kind of helping the other person to open up and truly put yourself in a place to receive messages. So ask for feedback, use magic words. And the third one is, I feel like probably the most important, is to recognize the contribution that other team members are making to the company, right? Instead of going around sharing how things are not going well, really looking at what everyone is bringing to the table, how everyone is making the company a better place. And lastly, lesson 9, going back to people, process, and technology. Again, this is something from the 1960s, right? It's nothing new. But we can redefine this framework, and people have been doing that. And really by putting people, elevating the importance of people that you work with, the clients that you serve, your fellow coworkers, people who report to you, and people you're reporting to, or cross-functional team members. I feel like that's really the key, not just for CICD, but for an organization to thrive. Okay, finally, if we just talked about a whole bunch of things, right? If there's one takeaway for you guys this evening out of the last 20, 30 minutes is, look at that picture. That's a house. What makes a house a house? It's got a roof, it's got a door, windows, electricity, steps, and all that good stuff, right? You don't see a house with only the roof. You don't see a house with only doors. You don't see a house with only televisions, right? To make a house complete, you have to have everything. And the same thing goes for organization. As a DevOps engineer, I feel like I'm an integral part of the house. It may not be something visible. I may be the beams hiding behind the drywalls. But then the important thing is, back to this, working with people together makes the work complete and brings a sense of achievement and purpose to what we do. Thank you. So lastly, do we have time for? Okay.
How much time do we have? Oh, okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, we were trying to rush through a little bit. Sorry, I was trying to rush through a little bit, making sure we allow enough time for the other speakers. But yeah, so I'd like to open up for comments as well as questions.
Yep. You have a question, you raise your hand. Yep, there we go. That was very inspiring, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was very inspired by the talk, and a lot of the points you mentioned hit home. It's about working with the users who are just trying to build their applications, and some things don't work, and they always reach out to you. Hey, can you help me? Can you? Why is this failing? Why is it not working? And as someone who maintains a CI/CD infrastructure, it's you have to think from their shoes, like, oh, they are rushed. They're trying to rush you. There are a lot of context switch happening. So the people aspects, it's very inspiring what you talk about.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
Yeah, let me bring you a mic because I know you're going to have.
Oh, okay, here you go. Right.
Thank you. So, you had mentioned, and I agree with you, that language, particular language, is not that important. But I did want to tell you the thought that came to my mind at that point is, although a particular language like Java or Python or whatever may not be important, the language, the libraries that go along with it are much more important. Just as a thought for, the kind of comment you made about that. Sorry.
Yes, actually, I totally agree with that. In fact, that's the second part I was going to say. A lot of times I pick the language, not because of the language, but because of the library that goes with it. That's exactly right. I cannot agree with that more. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to find out, you had two questions. The current CI/CD cycle, how often you guys release the product or code to production? And secondly, I just want to understand when you guys are working on the CI/CD project, how is the dynamics between both of you? The fact that you as a manager dealing with the CI/CD team. Yeah.
Do you know the answer? The first, you take the first one out.
Right now, all the release to production is still going through a change control board that happens once a week. So even though we deploy to non-production on a daily basis, or more than that, but to production is still once a week. And our working relationship is a love-hate relationship. Yeah, right now we're okay, but we'll see in an hour or two.
Yeah, and regarding release to production, we have different things. We have back-end software, hardware, and also we have multiple environments. So you talk about release to production, we also have release to these different QA environments and dev environments. And so there's lots of different ones. Yeah, and it ranges from daily to, actually some of it is a lot more, several times a day, to about once a week to once a month. It depends on what software components and when do we need to do it. Yeah, and actually we have a pretty good work relationship. I remember the first time I came into Arlo, he was there before. You were there before me, right? Oh yeah, before me. Anyway, he was one of the first guys to sit down and he explained to me how his vision for CI/CD and all these different components, and we just like hit it off right away because all of the keywords, key buzzwords in terms of technology. I said, yeah, I know that. So. Okay, yes.
I like the housing analogy, except you're both right and wrong. Not all houses have roofs, not all houses have doors, windows, TV sets, running water. But the question really is this house right for where you are? And that's why there are many different kinds of houses. Yes, some houses are inadequate, and I think we've probably all dealt with inadequate environments. But as the company grows, in some sense, you get many different kinds of houses. The good and the bad news of what I will call mega companies is they have many CI/CD houses.
Yes, actually, that's a very good point. I mentioned briefly and didn't say more. As we go and discuss our vision, it's like this really grand vision of everything that we can do and should do. But then when you start looking at it, I was saying, okay, this is a 5-year plan. and our executives want it in 6 months or less. So yes, and then of course, obviously, we can't execute a 5-year plan in 6 months, so we have to scale it down. You want to have thoughts more on that?
No, that's a really good point. Thank you for pointing that out. For different teams, right now we have different CI/CD pipelines to service the need for that team. So yeah, agree.
All right, any more questions, comments? Yes.
Hey, Dean, since you mentioned you created a CI/CD process from scratch pretty much, right? I have a question, which is mainly about how do you handle your customers, especially the executives. So it's like an overlap of two things. First is whenever you present a solution, right, many times, especially executives, they might not understand the value proposition of it, until it is created. So you occasionally might get the feedback that this is too ideal of a solution or the value proposition is unknown. So how do you really convince your customers? That's the first question. And the second part, which I mentioned, in the mixer, is how do you deal with the pressures? Because leading a CI/CD team brings with it an enormous amount of pressures. There's always do things quick, but things need to be done right. So with your experience, how did you keep the balance?
Right, so just to rephrase, maybe the first part is how to collaborate with
no,
so many different
how
teams.
do you present a value proposition of an idea?
Value proposition.
Yes.
Okay.
Because many times, especially if the executives or the senior developers are not from a CI/CD culture, they might not understand the value completely. They might just think that, hey, you're just creating another automation. So how do you bring value proposition? How do you present that? Like, how do you pitch it? And the second is, how do you handle the pressure of time versus quality?
I think at Arlo, the first one kind of took care of itself. After a few major releases, we had a post-project assessment, right? And then every single time the word CI/CD came up, right? And then the executives took the initiative upon themselves to do homework to find out what CI/CD is. So when I came in, what I did is kind of like be flexible, working with different teams to show them this is Arlo's flavor of CI/CD. To make it work, this is what we need. Okay, second part, the stress, right? It's again, it's an acquired skill. You really have to decide between two things: how much you care and how much you want to sleep. Once you find that balance, you'll learn to prioritize. It's definitely a learned skill.
Yeah, I think I was in some of the in the early meetings, especially when we defined the MVP, and this is where the sort of the contract in terms of so we were good in that we got the CTO and senior management very supportive of CI/CD. The challenge we have is exactly like what you said: is they expect to happen in 3 months, or it's like and it's not so much because they don't understand, but it's just because the need is so great, right? And then you have to build up the team and all that stuff. I mean, so I think what we need to do is to work out and say, here's the cost if you don't have it compared to what happened. So that's kind of cost savings. And of course, here's the cost for building the team and for buying the tools and the time for executing all that stuff. And so you have to. I think this is where kind of repetition comes, trying to convince different people, talk to them on an individual or small group basis, and trying to explain these things. And after a while, they get it. And then, of course, the other thing, they also see that we're all working so hard, and it's been a month already. Why aren't we done? Right? It's kind of pretty obvious after that. But it does take time, because initially, people would not understand all the levels of complexity. If you bring in a new tool, you got to learn the tool. If you bring in new people, you got to train them and bring them up to speed. And then of course, one of the challenges, because in CI/CD you really bring a lot of things together, and you can't bring them together if they don't fit. And so you have to fix a lot of other problems, which really is not a CI/CD problem per se, but until those problems are resolved, you can't really hook them together. And so I think just continuous explanation and trying to show something both qualitative and quantitative would convince them. And in our case, it did. So I think that was fortunate. After a while, they don't ask us, next month, why don't you have it for the next month?
So you guys have a combined 30 years experience in DevOps, and it's obvious you work together really great. From like a director perspective and a manager perspective, how do you continue to kind of grow that relationship? Is it communication? Is it just what's your secret? Because you have a really great vibe going on. So.
Yeah, actually, I think we outside of doing the work that we need, actually we also friends. We also, because we have such common interests in things, so we go to lunch a lot. We talk about a lot of different things, and I learn a lot from Dean on various ways that he does things. And also I learned about, you can buy this thing where you can hook up to your machine and you can measure all the, I don't know if you know that, what do you call that thing where you measure all the data? That you can basically diagnose your engine, where you don't have to bring it to the shop, but you can, all the cars now have that hookup, and with a simple app, and you can hook those things up, things like that. So I think that's how we build it, both in just having the interest in doing the job in CI/CD, but also have some common interests outside of that scope.
Yeah, that's called a OBD2 scanner. Car people here? Yeah, okay, so you know what it is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.